You're about to hear 7 stories told by those who shouldn't have lived long enough to tell them. Each voice you'll hear tonight comes from somewhere different. A quiet apartment, a forgotten riverbank, a long hollow tunnel that hasn't echoed in decades. They all claim their stories are true. And maybe they are. These are the voices found in broken recordings, old journals, recovered drives. Stories that never made it to the light. They say the world isn't haunted by ghosts, but by the memories that refuse to die. So turn off the lights, put your phone face down, and listen. Because tonight, NightLore will remind you that some stories don't just stay in your head. They listen back. Chapter 1. The eyes. I used to think I was just tired. That's what I told myself the first time I saw it. It had been another long shift, the kind where the hours bleed together, and you forget if you've eaten or not. When I got home, the front door stuck again. It always did. The frame swelled in the humidity, but I'd never bothered to fix it. I told myself I would same way I told myself. I'd start sleeping properly, stop eating microwave dinners, and get the lights in the hallway fixed. But of course I didn't. That night, I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and went straight to the fridge. The smell hit me before the door was even halfway open. Old mustard metal. And something else. Something sharp that stayed in the air longer than it should have. The fridge was mostly empty. One meal left. I peeled back the plastic and watched it spin unevenly in the microwave, the cracked glass turntable clicking each time it rotated. I remember thinking about how quiet it was, how even the hum of the appliance sounded distant. When it was done, I carried it to the kitchen table, dropped my keys next to it, and heard the metallic clink land on something soft. The tablecloth shifted. I frowned. For a second, I thought maybe it was something my ex had left behind, a marble, a coin, something that rolled under the fabric and got stuck there. I pulled the cloth up. That's when I saw it. There, pressed into the surface of the wood, was an eye. Not painted, not carved, embedded. Wet, detailed, human. The skin around it was faint, translucent. The sclera gleamed in the kitchen light, laced with red veins that branched like roots. And then it blinked. I remember my breath catching. My heel hit the chair behind me, and for a second I thought I was going to fall. The air felt wrong, heavy. I stared down at it, waiting for it to vanish, to prove I was just overtired or half dreaming. But it didn't. The eye just stared back, adjusting slightly as my shadow passed over it. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a reflection off the laminate finish. Maybe moisture had warped the grain, forming a shape my brain recognized as familiar. That's what brains do, they fill in the blanks. But then it blinked again. I couldn't move. My throat felt like sandpaper. The iris was light blue, rimmed with a milky film near the edge. A faint tear pooled at the corner and slid into the grain of the wood. I stepped back slow and deliberate, as though moving too fast would make it notice me. Then, because I didn't know what else to do, I covered it again. The lump beneath the fabric remained, but at least I couldn't see it. I stood there for a long time, pretending it wasn't there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. Eventually, I went to bed. I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it staring back at me. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had been something else. Sleep deprivation, stress, anything. I even laughed about it while brushing my teeth. But as I walked past the kitchen table, I noticed something. The fabric wasn't flat anymore. There were two bumps beneath it. I froze. The air in the apartment felt thick, like standing in a sealed room. I wanted to check. I really did. But I didn't. I locked the door behind me and went to work instead. All day, I tried not to think about it. Tried to focus on spreadsheets, on emails, on people complaining about things that didn't matter. But in every reflection, every monitor, every piece of glass, I thought I saw movement just behind me. A flicker, a shifting light. When I got home that evening, I told myself not to look. I went straight to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and tried to act normal. But my eyes drifted anyway. The tablecloth was raised higher. I told myself not to lift it. And then, of course, I did. A dozen eyes stared back at me. Some brown, some grey one or two, the same blue as the first. Some blinked slowly. Others darted side to side, as though tracking movement. A few looked swollen, the lid's cracked edges rimmed red. One had long lashes that trembled like it was breathing. I stumbled back and hit the counter. My hand brushed the sink. I think I laughed, or maybe I screamed. It all blurred together. I dropped the cloth again and backed out of the room. For hours I sat in the living room, staring at the dark, trying to decide if I should call someone. But who? The police. A landlord? A doctor? What was I supposed to say? There are eyes growing out of my table. Eventually I fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, the air was colder. My neck hurt. My back ached. I went to the bathroom and saw my reflection under the flickering light. The whites of my eyes were bloodshot. I rubbed them hard. When I looked down at the sink, I saw a small droplet of yellowish fluid on the porcelain. I didn't remember crying. That night, the bulges had spread to the counter. The wall near the sink. I booked a mold inspection online, even though I couldn't afford it. The earliest appointment was 5 days away. I told myself I could handle 5 days. I was wrong. By the next morning, they were everywhere. The walls, the fridge, the damn microwave, blinking, always blinking. The exterminator came on Thursday. He was polite, middle-aged, tired-looking. When I opened the door, he gave a quick glance around and said, "Mold. Issue right?" I nodded. He didn't seem to notice anything. Even as we walked through the kitchen, past the table, past the walls, pulsing with eyelids and veins, he didn't react. He didn't see them. He just set down his tank and started spraying. I stood there watching. When the mist touched the eyes, they shivered, contracting slightly, before returning to stillness. He said, "You'll want to air it out overnight," then left. I didn't move for a long time. That night, I dragged an old quilt from the closet and spread it over the bed. The mattress underneath wasn't flat anymore. It shifted beneath my weight. When I closed my eyes, the movement stopped. When I opened them, it returned. It was like they only existed when I looked. For a few hours, that trick worked. I could almost sleep as long as I kept my eyes shut tight. But the next morning, when I opened them, everything was gone. No furniture, no walls, just an endless white space stretching out in every direction, covered in eyes. Each one moved when I breathed. I screamed until my throat burned, but the sound came back at me, muffled like shouting underwater. I covered my face, but I could still feel them watching. I don't remember finding the spoon or the scissors. I just remember needing it to stop. The first press didn't hurt, not at first. There was pressure, then a spark like touching a live wire. When the eye popped free, I felt something slide inside my skull, a wet, shifting release. I did the other one without thinking. The pain came after, a flood of it. I remember the blood soaking my shirt, the floor tilting. I remember calling 911 saying I was hurt. I don't remember hanging up. When I woke up, everything was quiet. I was in a hospital, bandaged, sedated. A voice said I was lucky to be alive. Another said I'd never see again. They told me the infection had spread through the optic nerves. They said it was something new, something they'd never seen before. They said it was contained. But they were wrong. Because when I lay there that night, in the silence of that white room, I felt it again. A small damp pressure beneath my back, moving, blinking. And I realized it had never been about sight. It had been about being seen. Chapter 2. The Thing Under the Bed. I was 16 when it happened, and I've never told anyone the full story. Even now, saying it out loud feels wrong, like I'm breaking a promise I don't remember making. But some nights, when it's quiet enough, I can still hear the floorboards creak under my brother's old room, and I start to wonder if it ever really left. We lived in a bad neighborhood, the kind of place where the street lights worked half the time and the cops never showed up fast enough when they were needed. Gunshots were just background noise after a while, like passing trains. But somehow, our house was always spared. Burglars hit the next street. Overcar alarms went off in the night, but no one ever touched us. Mom said we were lucky. I'm not sure luck had anything to do with it. Dad wasn't around. I barely remember his face. He left when I was 6, and Mom never talked about him much after that. It was just the three of us, me, Mom, and my little brother Mikey. He was 8 that year. Bright kid, curious, always asking questions about things I didn't have answers for. He was also scared of everything. Thunder, the dark, the sound of pipes crooning in the walls. But mostly, he was scared of what lived under his bed. Mom brushed it off, as nightmares, of course. Kids have monsters. Kids outgrow them. But Mikey was different. He swore he heard it breathing. Once he told me he saw a hand slip out from under the bed and pull his blanket away. I told him he was imagining it, even though a part of me didn't believe that. It was a Thursday night when everything started. Mom got a call from work, some last-minute contract in another city. She had to leave the next morning. She promised she'd only be gone a week. She hugged me, told me I was the man of the house now, and to take care of Mikey. I said I would. That night, it was just me and him. He was on the living room floor drawing like usual. He always drew strange things, tall shapes, shadows, with too many arms, faces with no eyes. When I asked what they were, he'd say, "They're from the other side of the room." I never understood what that meant. After dinner, he asked if we could watch a scary movie. That surprised me. He'd never wanted to before. He said his friends at school had been talking about monsters, and that maybe if he saw one in a movie, he wouldn't be scared anymore. I didn't want to argue, so I picked something old and stupid, a black and white zombie flick. The kind where you can see the makeup melting off. Halfway through the screen, flickered, and the emergency alert tone blared. Amber Alert. There had been a break-in just a few blocks over. A man armed and dangerous. Authorities said to stay indoors and lock everything. Mikey's eyes went wide. He asked if the monster under his bed could get out when the bad man was near. I told him not to be ridiculous. Monsters aren't real. Criminals are. I checked the doors and windows twice. Everything was locked tight. By the time I got back upstairs, he was already in bed. His nightlight was on, casting that weak yellow glow across the room. He asked me to stay until he fell asleep. I said sure. I remember sitting there, half asleep myself, listening to his breathing slow when I heard something, a faint scraping from under the bed, like nails dragging lightly across wood. I froze. It stopped. I leaned down, pulled the edge of the blanket just enough to peek underneath. Nothing. Just the old hardwood floor and a few of his scattered toys. I told myself it was the house settling. That's what people say, right? Houses make noises, especially old ones. I went to bed. The scream woke me up hours later. It wasn't a normal scream. It was one of those raw, terrified sounds that rips straight out of your throat before your mind catches up. Mikey's room. I sprinted down the hallway, heart hammering. His door was open, the nightlight still on. He was sitting upright, clutching his knees, sobbing. I turned on the lamp, scanning the room. No broken window, no open door. What happened? I asked. But he just shook his head. When he finally spoke, it came out small and broken. It was the monster again. I tried to calm him down, told him it was a dream, that there was nothing there. But he wouldn't stop shaking. His little fingers dug into my arm. He whispered. It smiled at me this time. I remember the way he said it. Not scared, not even angry. Just hollow. Like he'd already given up on being believed. I promised I'd check. I didn't want to, but I had to. So I knelt down, sighed, and pulled up the edge of the blanket. At first, there was nothing but darkness. Then something shifted. Two yellow eyes opened. They weren't human. They were too wide, the pupils thin and vertical, like a cat's, but deeper, stretched, and wrong. The fur around them was slick, dark, and glistening, as though it had been soaked in something thick. And beneath the eyes, I saw teeth. Rows of them glinting in the lamplight, set in a grin that didn't move, but somehow felt alive. I jerked back so fast, I hit my head on the bed frame. Mikey screamed again. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the shadow under the bed, waiting for it to move. It didn't. It just watched me. I grabbed Mikey by the arm and pulled him out of the room. We ran down the hall towards the attic ladder. I don't remember deciding to go there. It just felt like the only place left. We climbed up and pulled the hatch shut behind us. The attic was freezing. Dust hung in the air. Mikey curled into a corner, still shaking. I dialed 911 with trembling hands. When the operator picked up, I said someone had broken in. I didn't mention the thing under the bed. I couldn't. I barely believed it myself. She told me officers were on their way. The line went dead halfway through the call. Then we heard it. Glass breaking downstairs. A heavy thud. Footsteps. Someone or something was moving through the house. Mikey buried his face against me, whispering, "It's coming." But it wasn't just one sound anymore. There were two. One set of footsteps, slow-dragging human. The other heavier, uneven, scraping the walls as it moved. Something snarled. Then came a scream. A man's scream. High-pitched, terrified, cut off in the middle. And then silence. We didn't move for the rest of the night. When the police found us hours later, the house was wrecked. The kitchen window shattered. Furniture overturned. Blood smeared across the floor. They told me the burglar must have panicked, maybe thought the house was occupied, maybe hurt himself, trying to escape. They found his pistol near the back door, slick with something they couldn't identify. They never found him. The officers said I was brave for calling, said I saved my brother's life. I didn't correct them. Mom came home 2 days later, pale and exhausted. She said we'd move soon. I didn't argue. Years have passed, and Mikey doesn't talk about it anymore. He barely remembers that night, or maybe he just pretends not to. But sometimes when I visit him, I catch him staring off towards dark corners, his eyes unfocused, like he's listening for something. And sometimes when I stay the night, I swear I hear breathing from under his bed. I don't check anymore, because I know it's still there. And deep down, I think it always was. It didn't come to hurt him. It came to protect him. I just don't know from what. Chapter 3. The Tunnel Job. They say it's quiet work, the kind that lets you think. That's what I liked about it at first. Long stretches of silence, the steady echo of boots on gravel, the smell of damp air and rust. You stop hearing the world up top. Down there, it's just you, the dark, and whatever's been buried long enough to forget its own name. I'd been doing structural inspections for the Rail Commission about 8 years when this one came up. Historic Clearance Survey, the email said. An abandoned tunnel near the southern coast, sealed since the 1940s. Most guys passed on it, too isolated, too much cleanup. And they didn't like the idea of crawling into a hole that hadn't been opened in 80 years. I volunteered. I liked old things, places that didn't want to be found. The site was listed as part of the old cross line, a wartime logistics route used to move supply trains between coastal bases. Records said a fire had broken out down there in 1944 after an airstrike hit a nearby junction. They sealed the tunnel afterward. No mention of a recovery crew. The department sent me with a junior tech named Dan. Early 20s, talkative, more energy than sense. He showed up in a neon jacket, AirPods in vaping between sentences. I told myself it'd be fine. I'd had worse partners. We arrived just before dawn. The entrance was fenced off with chain link and old timber boards padlocked twice over. Someone had clearly tried cutting through. At some point, the lower section was patched up with new bolts that didn't match the original. Creepy Dan muttered, flicking his torch on. I didn't answer. Once we broke the seal and pushed inside, the air hit us thick, stale metallic. Even through the respirator, it tasted wrong. The tunnel sloped downward. The rails were half buried under gravel, the sleepers swollen from moisture. Every 20 yards or so, there was a small refuge bay cut into the wall. Places workers could duck into when trains passed. Most were full of rubble. About 100 meters in, Dan spoke up. So what's the story with this place? Wartime accident, I said. Supply train caught fire after an air raid. They say the heat flash pulled the flames all the way through. Anyone die? Everyone. He laughed nervously, like I was joking. I wasn't. We kept moving. At some point I realized I hadn't heard the echo of our footsteps for a while. The sound just died, swallowed up by the weight of the air. I looked back and saw Dan about 10 paces behind his torch, jittering across the walls. He stopped. Hey, what's that? I followed his light. It was pointing at a small pile of fabric, half buried in gravel. He crouched, tugged it free. It was a sleeve, or it had been once. Canvas darkened with age, still attached to a rusted button. He turned it over. The underside was stiff, shiny, melted in places. I saw what looked like skin fused into the cloth. Jesus, he whispered. What the hell? Leave it, I said. It's just debris. We walked on. Every few minutes, I marked the wall with chalk. It was standard procedure, though the lines looked useless in that endless dark. Our radios crackled occasionally static, thick and wet sounding. It wasn't interference. It was deeper, almost like a voice trying to form beneath the noise. We reached the midpoint about an hour in. The tunnel widened slightly, revealing the remains of a freight car. It sat twisted across the rails, its metal warped inward, as if something had sucked the air out from inside. The markings were still visible, military codes, half erased by soot. There were bones too, small curled shapes in the debris, blackened beyond recognition. Dan lifted his torch. "This is insane. They never cleaned it up. They sealed it instead," I said. "Easier that way." He didn't respond. He was staring at the side of the wreck. Something there had caught the light, a patch of surface that shimmered oddly like wet paint. He reached out before I could stop him. When his glove touched it, the material flexed. Not metal, not rust. It pulsed once. He yanked his hand back. It moved. "Probably trapped gas," I said automatically, even though I didn't believe it. Then it moved again. A low wet sound echoed through the tunnel, like air being forced through a thick membrane. The light on my helmet flickered. The surface of the wreck shivered and began to split. Something slid out. At first I thought it was a person. The shape was humanoid, long arms, slumped shoulders. But the skin, it wasn't skin. It was stretched, torn, hanging in strips. Beneath it, everything was red and slick, like meat left too long in the sun. It moved with a sound like wet cloth, dragging over stone. Dan screamed. The thing twitched its head toward him. The skin over its face was wrong, too loose, slipping sideways as if it didn't belong there. Two eyes, cloudy and sunken, blinked out of sync. I stepped back on my boot, hitting a piece of metal. The clang echoed down the tunnel. The creature froze. Then it moved fast. I don't remember running, only the sound of my own breathing through the mask, the rasping echo behind me. Dan's light swung wildly. He tripped. I heard him hit the ground. I turned just for a second. It was on him. Its body folded over his limbs, bending the wrong way. The skin from its arm peeled and slid, wrapping around his face like a sheet. He didn't scream for long. I ran. The tunnel seemed longer than before. Every step felt like sinking into mud. The air grew hotter, thicker. Behind me, something dragged along the wall, scraping metal. I could smell burning. When I finally saw the faint outline of daylight ahead, I dropped my bag, ripped off the mask, and stumbled toward it. The air outside hit like ice. I collapsed just past the entrance, gasping, staring at the morning sky. When I looked back, the tunnel was empty. Dan was gone. I reported what happened. They called it an accident. Said the structure collapsed, separated us, that I must have panicked and misremembered. They sent a recovery crew the next week. 3 days later, the tunnel was sealed again. No remains were found. But last month, a new project lead forwarded me some of the archival data. There was a note in the margin of the final inspection report, one the public version doesn't include. Residual movement detected within sealed section. No further access recommended. And then scribbled beside it in handwriting I didn't recognize. If it's still down there, it's not alone anymore. Chapter 4. The River Wives. I grew up by a river that never stopped moving. It wasn't wide or deep or beautiful, like the ones in postcards, just an endless current that carved through farmland and shale brown and restless no matter the season. It ran behind our property line, close enough that you could hear it through the windows at night. My father always said it was good luck to live near running water. He was wrong. The town I came from doesn't exist anymore. Flood took most of it in 2003, wiped out half the valley after 3 days of non-stop rain. What didn't drown was abandoned too soaked, through too rotten to rebuild. But when I think back, the water was never the real problem. It was what lived in it. The first time I saw them, I was 9. I'd wandered down to the riverbank with my cousin Aaron on one of those slow summer evenings when the air feels heavy enough to drink. We skipped stones for a while. He always won. Then we saw her, a woman, standing knee-deep in the current facing upstream. At first, we thought she was fishing, but she wasn't holding anything. Her arms just hung at her sides, pale against the dark water. Her dress was the color of silt, torn at the hem. Her hair hung long and dripping tangled with weeds. Aaron called out to her, something stupid like, "You okay, lady?" She didn't turn around. Then she sank. Not like someone losing balance, not like she slipped. She just went down, straight down. The water barely rippled. We waited for her to come up. She didn't. Aaron wanted to run home, but I couldn't move. I kept staring at the spot she'd vanished, waiting for a hand to break the surface, a gasp, anything. Instead, the water swelled outward in slow, perfect circles. Then, a few feet from where she'd been, another face surfaced, not hers. This one was smaller. It smiled. We didn't go near the river again that summer. When I told my father, he didn't laugh, but he didn't believe me either. He just said, "Don't stare at the water too long. The river remembers who looks back." That night, I woke to the sound of dripping. Not from the roof, from inside, from the hallway. I got up half asleep and followed it. A trail of wet footprints led from the back door toward my room. They stopped at the foot of my bed. The floor was soaked, but there was no one there. The next morning, Dad found mud on the doorknob and said I must have tracked it in. I didn't argue. Years passed. Aaron moved away. The town shrank. The river never did. People started disappearing, 1 or 2 a year, always near the banks. A fisherman, a drunk, a teenager swimming after dark. Bodies didn't always come back. When they did, they weren't right. The skin looked waterlogged, yes, but not decayed, too smooth, too clean, as if they'd been scrubbed. And sometimes their mouths were full of silt, packed tight, like someone had tried to fill them back up. Locals started calling them river wives. Said the river took lonely men and sent back something that looked like them. Something that waited for company. By the time I was 20, I'd almost convinced myself it was just folklore. Then one night, I heard it again, the dripping. I was staying in my father's house after the flood warnings came back. The rain hadn't stopped in days. The windows shook in their frames. At some point, I must have fallen asleep in the armchair by the fire. And then that sound. Drip, drip, drip. It came from the kitchen. The house was dark, the air thick with damp wood and smoke. I followed it slowly barefoot, every step sinking into the soaked carpet. The back door was open. Rain came down sideways, slanting in through the doorway. And standing just inside was a woman. She was soaked through hair plastered to her face. Her dress clung to her skin, but she wasn't shivering. Her eyes were pale cloudy, the color of the river on a cloudy day. She smiled when she saw me. And when she opened her mouth, water spilled out. I wanted to scream but couldn't. She stepped forward, leaving no footprints, just spreading wetness that bled into the floorboards. Then she spoke. Or maybe the river did through her. Her voice sounded like current, low and steady. "You've grown." My throat locked. I couldn't answer. She tilted her head. Water streamed down her neck and soaked the collar of her dress. "Your father promised," she said. "He never paid." Lightning flashed outside. For an instant, I saw her face clearly, pale skin, stretched too tight, lips cracked in thin lines, eyes that didn't blink. Behind her in the yard, shapes were moving, half-submerged figures crawling from the flooded grass. I slammed the door shut and ran for the stairs. The wood squelched under my feet. The water was rising fast. When I reached the landing, I looked back once. The river had come through the doorway. Not a flood, something alive, pushing itself forward in long, writhing limbs of water. I locked myself in the bathroom and climbed into the tub. The house groaned. I could hear her voice on the other side of the door, soft, patient. "It's not you we want," she whispered. "It's the dead." I don't remember falling asleep. I don't even remember breathing. When I opened my eyes again, sunlight was pouring through the window. The floor was dry. The door stood open. The only sign of anything was a thin line of mud leading back to the river. I found my father's old journal that afternoon, hidden behind the stove. Inside were letters all dated decades ago. They were addressed to someone he only called the River Wives. The last entry said, "Trade made." They took her, and the house stands dry another year. My mother had drowned when I was a baby. That's what they told me. Now I'm not sure she drowned at all. The house is gone now, swept away in the flood of '03. But the river's still there. And sometimes when I drive past where it used to run, I swear I see a woman standing in the current, facing upstream, waiting. And if I look too long, the water starts to smile. Chapter 5. The Broadcast. I used to work night shifts at a small local radio station. Nothing glamorous, just filler programming, weather updates, and reruns of shows nobody listened to anymore. The station was called WZRD 104.6, though everyone in town just called it the graveyard. Not because of its time slot, but because most of us who worked there felt like ghosts drifting through static, talking to no one. It wasn't supposed to be scary work. You sit in a booth monitor, the signal play ads every 20 minutes. Most nights, I never got a single call. Just me, the red-on AR light, and the endless hum of white noise in my headphones. But something changed last winter. And if you've ever listened to the radio late enough, really late, you might have heard it too. It started around 2:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was halfway through a segment called Sleepless Lines, a listener call-in show that mostly got pranksters or lonely truckers passing through. That night, though, the line crackled with static before I even picked up. At first, I thought it was interference. But then, under the hiss, I heard someone breathing. Slow, wet, close. "WZRD, you're on the air," I said. "Who's calling?" Nothing. Just the faintest whisper. "Still awake." The sound wasn't coming from the phone line. It was coming through the broadcast feed. Through my own mic channel. I muted everything, checked the equipment, the cables, the frequency logs. Everything looked fine. But when I unmuted the board, the whisper was gone. The air was silent again, or at least as silent as static ever gets. I logged it and moved on. 2 nights later, it came back. Same time, 2:15 a.m. The same soft distortion bleeding through the feed. This time, it wasn't breathing. It was music. A slow, wavering hum that sounded like a lullaby played underwater. It drifted in for about 30 seconds, then cut out as cleanly as it came. No signal source, no frequency match. When I asked the tech supervisor the next morning, he just shrugged. Probably a bleed from a shortwave relay. Old stuff bounces around sometimes. You'd be surprised what's still out there. That explanation made sense until I checked the logs. The interference had been broadcasting on a dead frequency, one the FCC retired in 1978. After that, I started listening for it, not because I wanted to, but because it wanted me to. That's the only way I can describe it. Every night, a few minutes after 2, something would slip into the signal. A whisper, a hum sometimes, the faint sound of a voice humming through teeth. At first, it was easy to ignore. Then it started saying my name. Not out loud, not clear, but in the rhythm of the static buried in the hiss. I'd hear my name pulsing with the feedback, soft and steady, like it had been waiting for me to notice. And when I finally did, the power flickered. All the lights in the studio cut out for less than a second, just long enough for the monitors to reset. The on-air light came back first. It was already glowing before I flipped the switch. The broadcast changed after that. Listeners started calling in. They all said the same thing. "Hey, what's that song you played?" At 2:15. The one with the girl singing. I hadn't played anything. No tracks were queued. No recordings listed on the automation system. But when I checked the archive tapes the next morning, there it was, a track logged under WZRD live feed 2:15 a.m. WAV. It was over 6 minutes long. I played it once. Once was enough. The song began as a simple hum, like someone tuning an instrument too slowly. Then came a voice, female distant, humming along to no melody I recognized. Halfway through it, changed. The pitch warped. The voice started to split, harmonizing with itself. One tone too high, one too low. At the end, it stopped abruptly, followed by a single phrase whispered in perfect clarity. "Stay tuned." I deleted the file immediately, or tried to. But when I opened the directory again, it had reappeared under a different name. Live Now. Off. That was the night I started seeing her. The booth window looked out into the dark hallway between studios. Every so often, the reflection of the glass would catch movement, not light, not shadow, just motion. One night, while I was talking into the mic, I saw her behind me. In the reflection, a woman standing just outside the booth, head tilted, face blurred by the glass. Her mouth was open, moving soundlessly. And though the booth was soundproof, I swear I heard her humming. When I turned around, she was gone. But the microphone was still picking up her signal. I stopped coming in after that. I told the station manager I was sick, took unpaid leave, locked my doors, and threw out my headphones. But it didn't matter. At 2:15 a.m. every night, my radio turns on by itself. No matter what station I've set it to the dial, shifts a faint click, click, click until it lands on 104.6. And then, that voice, soft, steady, humming through static. Sometimes she speaks now. Sometimes she just whispers. Last night she said, "We missed you," on the air. I unplugged the radio, but the sound didn't stop. It was coming from inside the walls, faint, distorted, but there. I covered my ears and waited for it to end. When I woke up, the radio was still unplugged, and the on-air light was glowing red. If you're up late tonight, and you turn your dial between stations, if you catch that faint melody, that low hum, drifting just under the static, don't listen for long, because she'll notice you. And when she does, the light will come on, and she'll know you're still awake. Chapter 6. The Hollow Signal. I used to believe the silence between stars was empty. That space was a vacuum-cold, infinite dead. But that was before I heard what was waiting in it. I worked for a small listening array in northern Nevada. Nothing glamorous, just a patchwork of old parabolic dishes, half buried in the desert, operated by a skeleton crew of 5. Our job was routine monitor, deep space frequencies, log stray transmissions, filter out cosmic noise. Most nights were nothing but static. Sometimes we'd pick up the faint murmur of a dying satellite, the rhythmic pulse of a pulsar, or the whisper of background radiation stretching all the way back to the beginning of time. All of it meaningless, all of it safe. Then came Signal on 197 Hollow. It was around 3:42 a.m. when the feed spiked. At first I thought it was interference, a cosmic burst, or an Earth relay bouncing back from the ionosphere. But the pattern was too structured. Repeating clusters of tone and silence. Binary intervals. When I converted it to audio, I expected the usual distortion. Instead, what came through the speakers was wrong. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, faint, slow, almost like breathing. The waveform repeated every 12.4 seconds, but it wasn't consistent. Each cycle dragged a fraction longer. Like whatever was producing, it was tiring. I saved the file and labeled it Unknown, Origin Dolo 1. Protocol said to report it to the network, lead for classification. But I didn't. I couldn't stop listening. I replayed it over and over until dawn. And maybe it was the fatigue, maybe the desert heat, warping the signal, but I started to hear something inside it. A pattern beneath the pattern. A sound that wasn't supposed to be there. A voice. The next morning, I ran the spectrograph through a visualizer. At first, it looked normal, just spikes of data, nothing coherent. Then I slowed it down. In the center of the readout, between 2 pulses, the waveform curved, forming what looked like a shape. A circle. A hollow, perfect ring of silence, surrounded by dense clusters of noise. I didn't know why that terrified me, but it did. I stared at it for almost an hour before I realized my hands were shaking. That night, the signal came again. Same frequency, same rhythm. But this time, something else layered over it. A faint background hiss, like wind passing through a throat. Then, for a fraction of a second, a voice. Not human. Too deep. Too calm. Like the echo of something speaking from inside a cave. It said 3 words. I almost didn't catch them. We hear you. After that, I stopped sleeping. Every night I waited for the signal. And every night it came stronger. Sometimes it would shift frequencies on its own, like it was searching for me. By the 4th night, the array operator logs showed a constant beacon emanating from our own dish, transmitting back to the same coordinates we'd received from. I hadn't sent anything. When I checked the system files, I found a new entry, time-stamped at 3:42 a.m. Reply confirmed. There was no user signature, no operator ID, just those words. The dish had answered on its own. I brought it to my supervisor. He laughed it off, said it was probably an automated echo or system bug. But the next night, he didn't show up. When I called his home line, all I heard was static. And buried in that static, for just a heartbeat, I heard his voice, whispering the same phrase the signal had used. We hear you. I disconnected the array, manually. But the sound didn't stop. The monitors kept pulsing even without power. The speakers hissed softly, like they were breathing. And when I looked at the waveform on the dead terminal, it moved. A perfect circle, forming again and again, smaller each time. By the time dawn broke, it had become a single dot of light on the screen. I could still hear it. I could feel it pulsing under my skin, behind my eyes, deep in my teeth. It wasn't a signal anymore. It was inside the frequency, inside me. 3 days later, the entire array went offline. The official report said electrical fire. They found no bodies. But sometimes, when the wind hits the desert just right, people say their radios catch a faint, slow pulse every 12.4 seconds. Sometimes it's just static. Sometimes there's a whisper beneath it. It doesn't say much, just a low, tired voice that sounds almost human. We're still listening. Chapter 7. The Apartment Below. I used to live in a building that was never truly silent. Old pipes, thin walls, radiators that hissed when they shouldn't. Even at 3 in the morning, you could hear life moving through it. Footsteps above muffled TVs behind the walls, distant laughter from someone you'd never met. It made you feel less alone. Until the night, the noises stopped. Until the only thing I could hear was the apartment below mine. The building was 5 stories tall, built in the 70s, painted the color of cigarette smoke and regret. Cheap rent, but stable. Most tenants were students or retirees. Nobody stayed long. I'd been there about a year when the new tenant moved in downstairs. Apartment 3B. A man, mid-30s maybe. Never caught his name. I saw him once, moving boxes in through the side door. Tall, thin, wearing gloves, even though it was summer. When he noticed me watching from the stairs, he nodded once polite, but didn't smile. That night, I heard him moving furniture until nearly dawn, dragging sounds. A heavy thud now and then. Normal things, I told myself. Everyone makes noise when they move in. By the second week, I barely noticed him anymore. Except for one thing, he never left his apartment. At first, I thought maybe I was missing him by chance. Different schedules, different exits. But after a while, it got weird. His blinds were always drawn. No mail ever appeared outside his door. No packages, no takeout, not even footsteps in the hallway. Yet every night around midnight, I'd hear the same sounds. Footsteps pacing the floor, a chair scraping, sometimes whispering too faint to make out. And then, the dragging. Something heavy pulled slowly across the floorboards, inch by inch, for hours. I recorded it once on my phone, thinking maybe I could catch whatever was making it. But when I played it back, there was nothing. Just a low hum, like interference. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I pressed my ear to the floor. The wood was cold. At first, all I heard was that same hum, then a soft knock directly beneath where my head rested. Once, twice, then a whisper. "Can you hear me?" I jumped back so hard, I hit the desk behind me. My heart was pounding, but the apartment was dead silent again. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went downstairs. The door to 3B was closed, lights off. I knocked. No answer. I tried again that evening. Nothing. On the third day, I asked the landlord about him. She frowned, checked her clipboard, then looked at me like I'd said something strange. "Nobody's in 3B, she said. That unit's been empty for months, leaking pipes, whole floors under renovation." I laughed nervously, told her she must be mistaken, that I'd seen him move in. She just shook her head. "Keys are still in my office. You can see for yourself." I didn't believe her. Not until she unlocked the door and pushed it open. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no boxes, just bare walls and a faint metallic smell like rust and wet concrete. I walked in slowly, every step echoing too loudly. The floorboards were warped near the center of the room. Something dark had soaked through them long ago. The air felt heavy, like breathing through damp cloth. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw it, a long drag mark, leading from the wall to the middle of the room, vanishing beneath the floorboards. Probably from the old water damage, the landlord said behind me. But her voice sounded distant, fuzzy. I asked when the tenant had moved out. She stared at me. Sweetheart, she said, nobody's lived here since 1998. That night, the sounds came back, only louder, closer. The pacing started around midnight again, then the dragging, heavy, slow, deliberate. I didn't dare look down. I just sat there, frozen, counting each pull. Then came the voice. Muffled at first, rising through the floorboards, like breath through old wood. You opened it. The air went still. The lights flickered, once then stayed dim. And for the first time, I realized the sound wasn't coming from below. It was coming up. The boards beneath my feet began to creak, the seams between them swelling as if something was pressing from underneath. I backed away, but it followed the movement, a slow bulge tracing my steps across the room. I ran for the door. Before I left, I heard one last whisper, muffled by the floor. A single word that felt like a sigh. Stay. The next morning, I packed everything I owned and moved out. Didn't break the lease. Didn't ask for the deposit. I just left. A month later, I drove past the building out of curiosity. The windows were dark. A for sale sign hung crooked over the entrance. But in the top corner window, my old apartment, something was moving behind the glass. A faint silhouette pacing. And beneath it, one floor down, the blinds of 3B shifted slightly. Someone was looking up. You've heard their voices now. The ones who shouldn't have spoken. The ones who whispered through the static, through the floorboards, through the dark between stars. Maybe they were liars. Maybe they were victims. Maybe they were both. But if you've listened this far, if you stayed until the end, then you've already invited them in. The sounds you'll hear tonight, the hum in the walls, the faint knock beneath your bed, the whisper behind your name. It isn't just your imagination. It's the stories remembering you. This has been NightLore. Sleep well. If you can,